Okie dokie. Well, hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you happen to be when you view this particular video. We are delighted to bring you the new SOC on the block, the latest installation. Quote, I read this article, Are We Vulnerable? We have gathered for your listening and watching pleasure a collection of people that have all either been in a SOC, worked in a SOC, built a SOC, or managed a SOC in one way or the other. So there's no weird SOC question. We do invite you to ask questions in chat or via the Q&A to try to stump the chumps. But let me go ahead and let everybody introduce themselves. Let's start on the top of my screen with you, Tyler. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Tyler Farrar. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer here at Exabeam.
Cool. Andy?
Hello, I'm Andy Scree. I'm a Senior Director in Product Management. I'm responsible for Exabeam's TDIR applications, Threat Detection, Investigation, and Response, our Security Detection Content, and our Cybersecurity Research Team.
Lovely. Jason?
Hi, I'm Jason Romelli. I'm part of the SecOps group, which help operationalize partners and customers.
Bobby?
I'm Bobby Castile. I'm a technical account manager. I'm the technical liaison between the customer and Exabeam.
Right. Wonderful. Well, with that, we have a couple lines prepared, but I want to encourage everybody that if you see a topic on the screen and have a sub question on it, or if we get to the end, we haven't answered some of your questions or ideas or things you want to put forward, we are here to do that and capture it. And if you do manage to stump us, I wanted to follow up that we will follow up with a community post after this, kind of summing up some of the things that we talked about. And if we didn't get to your question, we will make sure that it is in print there for future generations. All right. So when we are talking about building a security program generally, sometimes you might say we're going to start a SOC, we're not going to start a SOC. So Tyler, as a CISO, when you're thinking about this, talk to us a little bit about how do you decide what your operation needs?
Yeah, so first and foremost, it's all about risk and understanding and answering kind of this key question that I throw out there is what type of controls, what are our key controls that we have in place to protect our key assets from our key adversaries, and understanding some of the key adversaries and the threats like phishing and ransomware, insider threat, et cetera, is extremely important. What are the motives and the targets of those key adversaries for really both identifying and exploiting your key assets? What methods and techniques are they going to use in order to exploit those key assets? And when we start to take and put together all of these threats and understand them, then we can start to create that program that allows us to actually analyze user behaviors, analyze device behaviors, and really look to eliminate and or at least detect any kind of threats within the network, and to do so in a way that's consistent with both regulatory and compliance objectives. There's also something to take into consideration, which is that internal friction that we all get that slows business processes down, really across the enterprise, adds complexity to just routine tasks and responsibilities. So from my perspective, how we build out this program is over a few key areas. One is building out those objectives. What are your key objectives? Here at Exabeam, we balance both prevention and response. And we do so in two major objectives. We attempt to reduce the cyber attack surface, but we also want to deploy threat detection, investigation, response capabilities to be able to detect those threats. Then we have to prioritize our risk management. This is number two. We have to prioritize risk management aligned to our objectives. We have to focus on remediating areas of risk that really are some of the major root causes of breaches, again, from phishing to malware to software vulnerabilities to third-party compromise, and then to things that are more internal, the inadvertent employee mistakes. Inadvertent employee mistakes are a major cause of a breach, and it's all just negligence, a mistake, right? The third thing is understanding business complexity. And when I say complexity, I mean the difficulty any person or group has in understanding IT infrastructure, security systems, business processes of your organization. Security teams really need to be able to ask simple questions. Things like, what are the schematics of our network infrastructure? Where are deployed systems and applications? Where's all this data stored? Where's our asset inventory, et cetera? So having a program with those diagrams of how that enterprise network has been arranged is extremely important. Number 4, train your employees. Human beings are obviously one of the weakest, if not the weakest link in any organization's digital security system. People make mistakes, they forget things, they fail and fall for fraudulent practices. That's where your cybersecurity awareness really needs to come in. Educate your employees on different cybersecurity risks and the threats out there. And then lastly, number 5, deploy the technology. Security teams have to have solutions. We need solutions that attempt to outsmart these highly motivated adversaries. Use behavioral analytics, automation, and purpose-built content across that full analyst workflow from detection to response. That solution can detect atypical behavior quickly and in real time to alert your teams to it. All of this type of technology should be able to monitor activity on your network from on-premises to the cloud.
I always take argument with him at this point. I think the weakest point in everything is actually programmers, because if they weren't programmers making weaknesses, then humans couldn't have those weaknesses taken advantage of. But yeah, definitely heard. Bobby, if I can call on you, you ran a SOC, I believe, for military, involved with a military level SOC. How did you even start to think about court communication? Did you have constantly people saying, oh, you're going to need to talk to them, or oh, you're going to need to talk to this team? Tell us a little bit about the communication of your organization.
No, I never ran it from the military side. It was more on the public power sector side is where I created it. And it's an interesting form of communication, because of what a lot of people don't know is that you have a whole separate operational network that is segmented from everyone else, which involves a power grid. So the communications back and forth, we will always monitor from the outside in, coming in. So what we would want to do is anything that would touch that network that we found malicious, it was, how do we communicate with the operators on that side? How do we communicate with management on that side? Because it was technically 2 separate organizations inside the same organization. So what we had to do is we just had to make sure that we had a clear communication path to their management and each management section, especially when talking about when things got inside and how it spread, especially from like a phishing perspective or a lateral movement perspective.
Exactly. I always say it's kind of hard to know off the top of your head, you have an IIS or is it an Apache web server? Well, what is the back end of it? So the
Exactly.
escalation paths can be absolutely huge. Jason, does that go with your experience too out there?
So my experience is kind of from the legal and the telematics side for cars. We basically, like Bobby had it, we would definitely watch the threats from outside and inside, just because every car was a threat, right, that we connected back to. So we need to do investigations if a car has been compromised or something's going on. Basically goes back to the whole Jeep hack. Everybody was worried back then, can a car be compromised and be run off the road, right? And so we needed to take that threat and bring that in and have external threats being populated into our SOC, but also internal too, right? Because you got those key servers that decode the response from cars and still can be compromised. So basically needed to monitor both sides of that.
Well, I had mine that I remember. I will say that I was that, call it an idiot, call it the girl who said, hey, they sent us a package. And I opened it up and I said, I just want to see what the code is going to do. And I thought, if I open it in a notepad, it won't show. And then this was at IBM, and I had a little call a couple minutes later. Jeannie, what did you do? I worked in the security operations, but I had my worldwide ops down the call that walked down and knocked on the door and said, can you take your computer offline? You've done something stupid. So when we say that sometimes it's the outsider threat can become the insider threat, even with its well-intentioned, it absolutely can. Andy, do you have any thoughts on how they can organize it, or how do people submit to you to ask questions? Because you own our product. You get tired of me sending you emails all the time saying, hey, are we built on Apache, or what do we use this, right?
Yeah, I think to me, it does come back to a lot of what Tyler said and really understanding kind of what you're trying to protect and then making sure more tactically that you have that information somewhere in the environment or can start to get it and proactively understanding the context data and where it lives in the log data before you have an incident, right? If you understand what you're trying to protect, it can really guide you down the tactical of how do I go about protecting this? What is that level of visibility that I need? I think, from an organizational communication perspective, running tabletop exercises is always good as well. It's kind of, again, that proactive before you need to figure out who do I need to communicate to and how do I reach them, having that kind of already predetermined. Tyler, one question for you kind of on the security program side, what are the metrics that you look at, or how do you track progress and success against the program? Did you define the metrics and the reports like early on when you're defining the program? Do you do this kind of ad hoc as you go? How did you kind of set out to understand, how do I continually understand, am I making progress against the program?
Yeah, it's almost a mixture of a few different variables. One being, I certainly want to leverage, an industry framework. Here we leverage the NIST 853 framework and kind of standardize upon that. And we take our parameters, a little bit more lightly on a commercial side versus a government side, et cetera. But aligning on an industry standard is super important. And why I bring that up is leveraging the best practices from there. So things like vulnerability management is obviously a big component of the bigger, broader word of cybersecurity. So I know that that's something that I need to input into my metrics. I know that, auditing and, in this case, security monitoring, security operations is a big piece that needs to go into my metrics. So I can baseline myself and my program around a framework, but I also need to be realistic about what do I have? What are the tools at my disposal to give me data, to give me metrics today? And so inventorying that tool set, those capabilities is extremely important as well. And then really combining those two together. So that's where I find myself. It's almost like a Venn diagram in the middle of, okay, I know that I need to be implementing these types of capabilities based on this framework, these best practices. But today, this is what I have. This is the data available to me. What are my gaps? I'm going to attempt to fill those gaps as I mature my program out and build it. However, right now, this is what I have. So some of that is just, what do I have at my disposal to be able to build out my metrics, and doing it in alignment with some best practices or industry standard.
And we were once held to metrics, including of this responses, that if somebody ever sent a note to the SOC, somebody within the SOC would respond to them within 24 hours. If it was just a random query of, hey, I saw this, are we vulnerable? What is the response time back to them to communicate back outward? And frankly, it's give anybody that wrote into us a feeling of confidence that, one, there's a human being that read it, evaluated it, thought about it, and then answered. And that can be a really big deal. And to create that kind of thing comes from the top down. Like, I know if I send Andy or Tyler a note, they're going to get back to me within a day. They're really, really good at that. And that is important all the way up through even your own CISO. If you're asking them a security question, do you feel comfortable asking the question? Do you feel comfortable that somewhere within the organization you're going to get that response? Because when people respond, they feel more built in and part of it. So building that collaborative security weave throughout your organization is going to matter everywhere. Do we have any other questions on this part of the program, or shall I move to the next? Cam, I don't see anything in QA, so we're going to go on. I always like talking about tooling next. We're going to talk about what kind of logs your SOC cares about, common tools, a little bit about general use cases versus how Exabeam use cases. So Andy, why don't you kick us off on this one? We're talking about what logs should you bring in. That really depends on what their business does, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. And again, it comes back to those kind of core use cases and what you're trying to protect. I think, most organizations today not only have an on-prem footprint, but they're continuing to invest in cloud. And so I think first step is always trying to get that level of visibility. So it's deploying those point solutions, understanding where your operational footprint is, and starting to get that initial visibility. And I think those are, if I think about kind of the three key operating environments, it's endpoint, network, and cloud. And kind of starting there and making sure that you have visibility everywhere. I think, when it comes to individual log sources that we see customers being very successful with, it's oftentimes things that don't generate their own security signals in a lot of cases, things like Active Directory authentication events. And now sometimes you can get those through EDR. But really trying to understand, how do you get visibility once an attacker's in the environment, has presence there? It's the reconnaissance, the lateral movement. This is oftentimes where those attackers dwell for a long period of time. And oftentimes that's where it's difficult to see an attacker with, the tools that you may already have deployed on the endpoint or network sensors. And so that's always an area, I think, of focus for me. I continue to see kind of third-party point solutions, their detections with machine learning and more heuristic-based approach continue to get better over time. So I think the detections that those third-party alerts are able to generate continue to get more and more high fidelity. And I think, this is, to me, where you put analytics in between these detections you're already getting from third parties to try to uncover more of what the attacker's doing as they're moving across the kill chain before they trigger that next alert. Is there that ability to use analytics and behavior to start to sniff out the attackers sooner than you would just letting them hit all of your different security products across the estate? And I think, using frameworks like NIST, using frameworks like MITRE is also important to start to really understand what is your threat detection coverage, where are areas that you may have gaps or weaknesses. That's the other, approach, is to really use a framework like that to better understand what to do next. That's always the question we get from customers: what log source do I onboard next, or where should I focus next? And having a framework like MITRE, just from the detection side, helps prioritize kind of that next step. What do I want to be able to detect? And then therefore, what log sources or context data do I need to support that?
Makes perfect sense to me. Jason or Bobby, on this one, do you have customers that have brought in ideas of, these are our use cases, these are our problems, and they are uncertain about what logs they want to put into the system? I mean, new customer, new coming in, do they talk to you guys about it?
Yeah, I can.
You want to answer, Jason?
Yeah. So anyway, I can give you some of my scenarios. So at Verizon, like I talked before about cars, right? One of the biggest things is, what is your use case, right? And our use case at the time of purchasing Exabeam was actually, can the car be compromised, right? And from our point of view, we needed the logs from those car assets being sent the data, right? We already knew what a car can do, right? Unlocking cars, starting cars, emergency lights, all that kind of stuff, right? And then we took that list and brought that into Exabeam and did analytics on stuff that we didn't know about, right? So we would be aware of what was happening and we knew was correct and what was not. But every company is different, right? My last company was a legal company. We did a lot of e-discovery, right? We probably would, I want to say, probably had the most malware that we can define. We probably had 1,400 pieces of malware a day, just because with discovery, you're legally not supposed to delete stuff. So our focus was not getting compromised every day, because we did have a lot of stuff that got triggered, and we had to identify that. So our important log source was basically AV and EDR solutions, to leverage that into Exabeam and understand what, if it got out of the e-discovery farm, or if it stayed in there and it got caught.
Makes perfect sense. Jason, did you have I'm sorry, you were just talking. Bobby, did you have something you wanted to add in there as well?
Yeah, from my perspective on what I see every day is that I do get customers that do get onboarded and then they're at that kind of or turning point of where do we go from here, right? Where do we start once we have Exabeam deployed? Where do we start? And a lot of it boils down to is it's what framework are they following? What are the crown jewels we're trying to protect? What keeps them up at night? From a perspective, we all know that we talked about it earlier, that the end user, it can be looked at as the weakest point in an environment, right? It's the joke between what sits between the chair and the keyboard. That's what we have to, that's the biggest defense, right? It's when those pretty red buttons presented to someone, it's probably going to be pressed at least a few times. So phishing is always a good starting point that we talk about if we haven't really started nailing it down. And phishing then lead into compromised credentials, things of that nature. But it really boils down to is that even when you're looking at the Exabeam use cases, is that all of them link together and all of them think together in some form of another. And you have to look at it from how is it impacting and going down the kill chain with each use case. So it's really just kind of trying to figure out what direction I want to go. What are the crown jewels? What's changing in the business in the next 6 months? Because they could be pulling out firewalls and replacing firewalls. They could be changing into a new EDR solution. So from my perspective, I want to understand what they are doing in the environment, what crown jewels, what's everything that's going on. So then we can take the approach of how can we build Exabeam for what you need it in your environment, not just the tool as a whole, but what they need.
Well, you brought up an excellent point of what happens when somebody higher up has decided we are going to swap out all of our old Symantec endpoint and now we're going to move something new. Tyler, is there a moment that really matters in particular of saying our times have changed? I mean, that's the most dangerous, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's two aspects of that. Number one is implementing that new solution and having overlap with the existing solution, and then ensuring that the new solution is providing the value that's necessary. And thirdly, and I've been bitten by this before, is ensuring and doing a trust but verify that the legacy solution is completely decommissioned and deprecated from, removed from the network. You can risk having gaps in visibility through your log sources and then into your SIM from doing so. But just remember what we've been talking about here at the end of the day boils into two big areas. The two things that you're really trying to detect or have visibility into is data loss and operational disruption. Is data being stolen, right? Exfiltrated, or is somebody attempting to disrupt your network and business operations? And Bobby and Andy and I have already said it. It's all about those key assets and understanding your business complexity and understanding your key assets. I had a Security Plus boot camp teacher that boiled it down in the most simplistic way possible, and I'll never forget it. And I'll say it here today. It's all about the data, dummy. So where's your data? Where's that sensitive data? Where is it sitting? What are those key assets? And then identifying what are the log sources that I'm going to need in order to have visibility into that asset, both again from data loss and operational disruption. So that's how I would think about those things. And then really trying to understand from there, what can I build upon in order to do so? Just remember that this isn't just about the external adversary either. There's also the internal, I don't want to call it adversary, but threat or that risk, where again, employees can make mistakes. So what are those key logs and key behaviors that you're really looking for with respect to that key asset and with respect to that data?
I want to bring up, because there was a line in here that I wanted to talk about in particular. We talk a lot about the credential activity that we see, and it is one of our strong points that we are absolutely your insider threat organization. We'll go on there. I want to take it to, there was a rough Friday afternoon, and many of you remember it there, where suddenly Apache patched their Log4j system, and they said, oh, there's a huge vulnerability. Suddenly there was like, well, Log4j, And everybody remembers it's like somebody wrote an exploit and suddenly nobody got their weekend off after all. So when they had Log4j, immediately the neat thing you can do about finding the internet is saying, how do I even see if I've got it in my environment? Because at sometimes the level of me as a SOC person sitting there, I have no idea whether we use Apache or IIS off the top of my head. I'm new here. I got to find that out. So there's different kinds of searches you may be able to look at different parts of your data, and not all tools are the same. Some of it's just looking at all of the logs and saying, is this piece present? For instance, there was a great JexBoss vulnerability as well that was purely an AppSec tool of saying, okay, a JexBoss looked at everything, but then there was a JBoss ransomware because they infected the tool itself and found an exploit. So any of you want to talk about the adventure of saying, what do you do if a component of your system, a SolarWinds, something that you use to monitor, what if your IDS gets compromised, right?
I think there's two aspects to this. One is, I think the immediate reaction is, okay, have I been impacted by this, right? And it's running those searches, going through logs, looking for those, fingerprints that someone's trying to exploit this vulnerability or has successfully done that. And once you get through that panic attack and exercise, then it's, okay, what is actually vulnerable in my estate? What do I have that's running this vulnerable version? And I know Tyler and team spent a lot of time doing that. And that's an exercise, again, that if you're proactive, right, and it's the unsexy things in security, like your asset database and understanding your estate, these things can have huge dividends when there is a new vulnerability out there, to be able to quickly answer that question of, do I have this vulnerability in my environment? Where is it? And how do I patch it or remediate this quickly? If you're starting from a vulnerability and saying, I have no idea if I'm impacted, and you have to go through all of your different tools, all of your systems to figure out first, am I vulnerable? That's only increasing that risk to the business for that period of time that you can answer those questions.
Yeah. And just as you remember, if you have a 24/7 SOC or even that fine SOC, they are the ones that are going to get those questions. So setting your SOC up so that they know these questions are incoming and able to answer them, or have a methodology for how they go look to find the answers. It's huge. Let's talk a little bit about insider threats. What are some scenarios where you would need a separate or dedicated insider threat team? Tyler, you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, from scenarios perspective, there are multiple ways that an insider can really become an insider threat. And that ranges from really just being a motivated employee who is looking to, whether or not that's because they're disgruntled or because of bribery, is really looking to, again, take data loss, or disrupt operational disruption. So what are some of the key ways that can happen? Layoffs is a big scenario around this, right? And we saw a lot of that, especially across the Bay Area and Silicon Valley towards the beginning of the year and last year in 2022. Another big one is through mergers and acquisitions, and the risk that comes with really connecting two companies together and all of the security assessments that are required there and things that are missed because the businesses want to move forward quickly. One that people don't think as much about, but is a major risk, is new hires. New hires come on, they don't know really anything about the company. They just went through indoctrination, and now they're being flooded with new emails to go update a system, take some training, et cetera. And so it's very easy for them to be tricked into clicking on something like a phishing email because they just posted on their LinkedIn that they started a new job somewhere. And then again, the last one is around the being either a disgruntled employee, maybe moving on to a competitor, or maybe they're being bribed. And that's really where we see a lot of the compromised credentials come into play.
Jason, didn't you have something you were saying just the other day about SIM card hacks as well that kind of feeds into this?
Yeah, so we had that same problem at Verizon was duping SIM cards, right? Your employers are very easy to target, especially posting on LinkedIn and showing that you work for Verizon, right? And one of the key factors is back then, and it's still an issue, right? Is copying SIM cards, being able to transfer those text messages or MFA tokens that transfer through SMS, right? We definitely had a big problem. I mean, most cell phone companies have that problem, but they were definitely targeting new employees or some that were vulnerable that needed that cash. So that was definitely an issue at Verizon before.
It looks like we have a question from Edna. I'm going to unmute her. She has her hand raised. Edna, you can take yourself off mute and ask your question if you'd like to. Oh, no, she took her hand down. Never mind. That's okay, Edna.
And Jeannie, you're on mute.
So that totally happens all the time, especially me clicking the wrong buttons. I am the insider threat. Bobby, what were your thoughts on this how big do you think a team needs to be? Can it be one person if you have a general SOC? Is it one person if you have a 2-human SOC? Is one more of side than the other? What are your thoughts on it?
It just depends on the organization. I mean, that's the first part of insider threat is defining what your insider threats are. Are they contractors? Are they employees? Like, what is it? What's the definition? And then also then define your risk appetite. So how big, much of an appetite do you want for this? A lot of it, what it boils down to, like from size wise, is that once you define it, it just depends on what you're looking for, right? Are you just looking for those disgruntled employees that didn't get the raise, or are you looking for, are you doing enough on the back end from the IT side? Are you auditing everyone's permissions? Are you making sure permissions, when people change positions, are permissions changing? Are you auditing that? Things of that nature. You also have to leverage your board or stakeholders in the business to depend on what they want to take out, right? What are they looking for from the insider threat program alone? And understanding that technology, it won't be the only thing. The technology won't solve the problem, right? You have to kind of build a framework, you have to build a plan, you have to build what you're looking for out of that program, and then kind of that trust but verify, right? You can also, from that aspect, from the trust but verify aspect, as your audited permissions, you can give that additional, you could give certain particular people additional information, and then watch that trail of what they do when you have like determined the threat. You'll watch what they're doing, see if they're going outside of what their everyday purpose is, what they're trying to do. And then a lot of it is use the tools, start building stuff start looking for things like people looking for jobs or building resumes or things of that nature. Start looking for additional things outside of there. So a lot of it is just depends on what your appetite is and what the company wants. So it could be 2, it could be 3, it could be 4, right? A lot of it, sometimes I've seen teams where you have 6, 7, 8 insider threat people outside of the SOC, and it's normally attached to legal. It's not attached to the cyber side. So it just depends on what direction they want to go.
True enough. Well, I'm going to throw 2 scenarios at you real quick. One was a large, let's say, international beer distributing organization that once said, I have 33,000 websites and each one of them has a service account. And I don't know where they are or where they live, because every country where they were incorporated gets to make up their own. So there can be a lot of insider threats that do not involve a human being at all, but still, in the end, have a credential. So service accounts and pieces and those changes. And we can all blame marketing teams, because marketing teams love to spin things up and then do not pay attention to them after that. So Andy, what are the changes that help them go undetected, and what are the best principles of finding it and getting a rope around that so that you at least know where to look?
Yeah, I think service accounts and just overprivileged accounts are a huge issue, especially in the cloud. I know Palo Alto continues to put out reports quite regularly about the over-credentialed service accounts or over-permissioned. And I think, again, this is a perfect example of where analytics can really help, especially when you have hundreds or thousands of service accounts and who knows when they were created, why they were created, but starting to get that baseline of behavior, right? Service accounts should be used to do repeatable things. And so being able to see those deviations in those credentials is really important, especially seeing, things like interactive logins with service accounts is usually a pretty good dead giveaway that someone is using a service account in a way that they likely shouldn't. And I think, this comes back to, again, like, what is the purpose of the insider threat program? I had an organization a number of years ago, and I asked them this question, and they said, our goal is to make sure employees don't get fired, right? So it's about getting visibility into the unintentional things that employees do that are against policy or that they shouldn't be doing, and trying to course correct them before something really bad happens. And I thought it was a really kind of unique way to look at this. It was more of like the proactive approach to making sure that those unintentional things don't happen for, new hires and existing employees. But again, I think it comes back to, with the service accounts, it's the visibility. How and where can I get visibility into how these service accounts are being used? And I think analytics is a great way to kind of turbocharge and get that baseline understanding of what they're used for. And then that can give you the capabilities to say, can I consolidate these? Or what other tools do I need to better manage these service accounts if they're not being managed in a central location or by some sort of privileged activity monitoring solution?
I think the most complicated environment I ever heard of was somebody from a university who came and talked to me. They said, Jeannie, we've got students, we've got faculty, we've got alum. We have Wi-Fi for all of the, for the classroom. We have a different Wi-Fi for the dorms. We have the bursar's office. We have the teaching hospital. We have patient health information. They literally had, if there was any kind of governance that was in place in the United States, it's found on a large university campus. So those were as complex as they can be. Tyler, from a CISO perspective, if somebody suddenly voted you on the board of directors of, let's see, the teaching hospital of Stanford, what would you do? Where would you start?
I think the best way to put it is what's already kind of been said is, what's the purpose or the objective of it's really a program. It needs to be a program. What are those key stakeholders that need to be involved in that program? For me, that's, folks like legal and HR. If you have a physical security team, a facilities team, that's equally as important. But at the end of the day, I think purpose drives not just the question of how big does the team need to be, but what type of role or individual do you need on that team? And so we've talked a lot about the purpose of detection of insider threat or insider threat behavior. But when we talk about or even just think about insider threat, most of the time our brains go towards that malicious, intentional insider. And that's, while that can cause the most significant disruption and damage to your organization, that's not the norm, or that's not the majority of where insider incidents occur. It's on the negligent side. So it's actually about positive intent and just people making those mistakes or being ignorant and not adhering or following to your security policies. I like that objective of, we don't want to, our employees to be fired. The other piece of that is, we don't want the mistake to get worse than it really needs to be. And maybe an individual on the inside accidentally causes some vulnerability, opens up a hole, right? What we don't want is then an external actor to identify that hole and exploit it, and then make this much bigger of an issue than it needs to be. So when you think about not only how big your team needs to be, but what are the type of people that need to be on that team? Because at the end of the day, this is all about people. Human beings are very complex individuals, and you want somebody in that role that not only understands the technology and how to detect and obviously investigate insider threat, but there will be a time where that individual needs to go talk to a person. And depending on the mindset and the situation of that person, things can change very quickly. It can be, hey, I'm sorry, that was a mistake. Thanks, let me know, and move on with my day, versus somebody completely freaking out and again becoming now the malicious insider. Now there's intent to do harm, and there's an entire investigation that goes into that. And it's almost somebody that has not only the people skills, but the ability to, maybe they've had a background in law enforcement, even counterintelligence is another big area. So think about what's the purpose of that program and those objectives, because equally as important is the type of role that goes into it.
You actually just described a mom, so I just want to have a shout out for there's moms with a lot of kids. What are you doing? What are you hiding behind your back? There's a lot of really great action of just being able to ask these gentle questions of somebody who doesn't. Let's see, if Tyler was my web person working in Equifax in South America and set up his web thing to be admin, which is how they got hacked. I don't want to let go of this perfectly good asset that did something wrong. I might need to talk to them and work them through it and understand why. So closing thoughts, Bobby. We've said a lot about the different things of like, am I hacked? Am I vulnerable? What are your closing thoughts about how your SOC should organize to be able to handle some of that?
Just my closing thoughts are just from my perspective, looking at it from a technical perspective and an operationalized perspective, is that my job is to try to make the SOC's life easier, right? So it's making sure that you have a plan developed, use a specific framework, make sure that you have the correct log sources. And if you don't know what those log sources are, and remember that Exabeam has their specific log sources or use cases for logs, and then remember that there's also business use cases for logs as well. So it's two different things. That a lot of it's just make sure that you're working with the correct people to make sure that you get everything mapped out and make sure that you have the proper logs and proper use cases in place. And that way you have everything. It's easier to build programs out from that way, especially like an insider threat, because then you're not missing that technological side from an insider threat program.
Makes perfect sense. Jason, you have a little bit more on take us from the technical over to the human side?
Yeah, it's always get the direction of your business, understanding what the risk is that they want you to secure. I think a lot of SOCs don't get that information. We say that with a lot of customers. When that question is asked, well, what are you trying to get out of our product and secure? They really don't know. And it's different for each group, right? A business has a different view of it, but the business is the one that has to define what the security group is supposed to be handling. If it's insider threats because of risk, or if it's external, attacks. That's how you define what logs come in. You can definitely throw as many logs as you want into a product, but then you got a lot of noise. You got to understand what you're trying to achieve out of the product.
It makes sense. And if anybody hears a lot of noise, especially for me, it'd be Andy. Andy, do you have any other input on this?
It's a good segue, because I was going to talk a little bit about the product itself here. I think, this is a big area of focus for me in the product team, not just on, how do you detect things and the technical aspects of running a SOC and kind of TDIR holistically. It is about how does the SOC management, how does the CISO understand the capabilities? And so we released a product called Outcomes Navigator recently that really, the whole goal is to help answer some of these questions of what log sources should I bring in if I know I care about a particular use case or a particular part of the MITRE framework, and trying to be more prescriptive and help organizations really answer those questions quickly and easily, and then giving them that ability to continuously monitor. right? So it's great to say I should onboard these 3 log sources, but just sending them into a SIM is not enough. You need to make sure that you have the right fields parsed. You need to make sure you have the right context to pair with those based on the types of detections you're looking for. So this is a huge area of focus for us on the product side, is to try to get much more granular and much more specific to really give our customers and our partners the ability to understand what their current capabilities are and then what could they be doing next. Because in security, we're never done. There's always something more to do. And so trying to give that kind of breadcrumb of these are the possible 5 next steps, you kind of pick and choose your own adventure based on what you think the business needs first and foremost.
Yeah, Bobby, you're right. It's all about actionable data. What can they use? And that really is going to be different depending on what you do. For instance, if I manufacture something and my business is robots as a service, then, I might be willing to pay one fee if I make a mistake. But if a robot hurts a human, I care mostly about my service accounts and my ability to segment my data, as opposed to on the other side, if I am entirely a payment processing, then, well, if my payment processing system gets mucked up, then I go out of business. So what keeps you in business? If your security teams all quit and didn't show up today, what is going to keep you in business? And Tyler, take us home and tell us, what are the core final things that you would think about in terms of am I vulnerable? Am I not vulnerable? What keeps you in business?
So I go back to what I started with, and Jason just mentioned as well. It's all about risk. So start with that question of what are those key controls or key capabilities that you have in place or that you need in place to understand what are those key threats, those key adversaries, and where are they trying to go? What are those key assets? Start with that one question to answer or ask more questions around what are my key controls? What are my key adversaries or key threats? What are my key assets? Where are my critical data, et cetera? Second piece is all about the communication. We talked about this at the beginning of the call, but communication is critical. Communicating with the organization at large fosters that culture of risk awareness. Everyone understands how they can contribute to cybersecurity. Communicating across teams instills that shared responsibilities. And I think most importantly, communicating and collecting better data across the SOC so that analysts know what normal looks like and therefore can make agile and informed decisions about user and device behavior. The last thing I'll say, and what Andy just mentioned, is the job never ends. You're going to constantly be working this and pivoting, and vulnerabilities are going to come in every day. These articles come in every day. So build out the prevention capabilities to be able to ask those questions and get answers very quickly into whether or not you have that vulnerability within your network, but also, again, balance that prevention capability with your detection capability to identify quickly when there's either an external threat or an internal threat within your network.
And you're going to document as you go too. So as we open up for questions, if you've got a question, throw it in chat or raise your hand. We'll get you unmuted, but it really is a lot about your SOC's going to be learning. For instance, if I've asked, do we have log4j? And Tyler went and did a round and found with our development team and said, no, we are not a Apache shop at all. I know there's a certain class of vulnerabilities that I don't have anymore. So cool. I'm not going to worry about that. But I got to document that too. So there's a lot of things that you're going to do to make sure that at 2:00 in the morning, do you have the answers you need? So if any of you out there listening have had 2 a.m. questions or problems come in, feel free to share them with us. If not, I'll presume that everybody out there has got a SOC team that knows exactly what they're doing at all times and what to do if you're vulnerable and how we can help you using Exabeam.
Everyone is set to go, I guess. So we can start wrapping this up. If you do have a question, go ahead and throw it in. We will make sure we get it answered for you. But while we're waiting for that, there'll be a survey at the end of this. I know it's everyone's favorite thing. It takes about 30 seconds to fill out. It is super helpful for us. So we'd appreciate it if you do have the time to fill that out for us. You will be getting a link to this recording in 24 hours. So look out for that email. It'll come directly from Zoom, and we'll have links to some upcoming events as well. We have an API webinar next week, and then we'll be talking about May releases and some upcoming changes on June 13th. So you'll get the links to that to register for those. Thank you so much for panelists. This was incredible. I'm really excited to edit this and get it up. So I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks everybody who said you'd come do this with us.
Thank you. And have a wonderful day, everyone.
Bye-bye.